The wind did not howl. It screamed. It was a thin, high sound that peeled the heat from a man's skin and drove the snow sideways, erasing the line between the frozen earth of the Montana Territory and the endless gray sky. Beneath that sky, the horse, a good bay mare named Bess, gave her last breath. It came out in a ragged plume of steam, a final white flag against the impossible cold. She had run for 2 days, fueled by a terror that had passed from the rider to the animal, and now her strength was gone. Her legs buckled, a tangle of bone and exhaustion, and she pitched forward, sinking into a drift with a sound like a breaking branch. Clara Ellison fell with her, thrown clear into the powder. The snow was so deep it swallowed her to the hip, a soft, freezing trap. For a moment, she did not move. She just lay there, the shriek of the wind filling her ears. The silence from the mare was worse. It was the sound of the end. "No," she whispered. The word was stolen by the gale. "No, Bess, please, get up, please." She crawled to the horse's head. The mare's eyes were open, filmed over with ice, staring at the gray nothing. A sob, dry and hard, tore from Clara's chest. She had nothing left to cry. She pushed herself to her feet. The effort was immense. The cold had seeped into her bones, making her joints feel brittle, like old glass. She stood alone in the center of the white, empty world. She looked back. There was nothing. No riders, no distant line of smoke, but she could feel them. She could feel Miles Holloway, his cold, pale eyes, his soft hands that were always damp. He was coming. A man like that did not lose property, and she was property, bought and paid for by her father's gambling debts. Clara pulled the ragged wool cloak tighter. It was useless. The wind cut through it as if it were cheesecloth. Beneath it, the remnants of her wedding dress were frozen stiff. The silk, meant for a parlor in Helena, was ripped to shreds by brush and ice. The delicate lace trim was scabbed with her own frozen blood from where she had fallen, hours or perhaps a lifetime ago. She was to have been married at noon. She had run at 10, climbing from a second-story window while her father argued with the banker's men in the hall. She had run to the stable, taken the mare, and ridden north without a map, without food, armed only with the certainty that death in the wilderness was better than a life in Miles's bed. Her right hand was clenched. It had been clenched for 2 days. She forced the stiff, blue fingers open. In her palm, pressed deep into the flesh, was a small silver locket. Her mother's. It was the only thing of value she had taken, the only thing that was truly hers. She closed her hand around it again, the metal biting into her frozen skin. She had to move. To stop was to die. She began to walk. Each step was a fresh agony. The silk wedding slippers had disintegrated miles back. Her stockings were gone. She was walking on raw, frozen feet. She left small, pink stains in the snow, but the wind covered them in seconds. The gray light of afternoon began to fail. The world turned a deep, bruised purple. The wind grew teeth. It found the tear in her cloak and ripped at the thin silk of the dress, exposing the skin of her back to the air. The shock of it made her gasp. She stumbled, falling to her knees. This, she thought, was the soft, inviting part of freezing. The stories trappers told were true. It stopped hurting. It just felt tired. It felt like sleep. She closed her eyes. She saw her father's face, not angry, but beaten. She saw Miles, smiling as he slid the ring onto her finger at the rehearsal, his thumb pressing too hard into her knuckle. No. Clara opened her eyes. She would not die here. Not for them. She pushed up again, and then she saw it. It was not a mercy, it was just a shape, darker than the snow, barely visible in the dying light. A low mound. A drift had piled high against its western wall, making it look like part of the earth. But a thin, dark line broke the white, a roof line. A cabin? She fell more than walked toward it. It was half buried. There was no light in the single, dark square of its window. No smoke rose from the chimney, which was just a pile of mud and rock. It looked as dead as her horse. She reached the door, a rough planked thing with no handle. She pounded on it with her frozen fist, but her hand had no feeling. It made only a dull, soft thud.
"Please,"
she wept, the word cracking in her throat.
"Is anyone? Please help me."
There was no answer but the wind. She sank down, leaning her back against the rough wood. It was over. She had failed. She leaned her head back and let the driving snow sting her face, covering her lashes in ice. She clutched the locket and prayed, not for rescue, but for a quick end. Her body gave up. She slid sideways into the snowdrift, a heap of torn silk and frozen despair, and the world went black. Luke Mallory saw the dead horse first. He squinted against the stinging snow, his rifle resting easy in the crook of his arm. He'd been checking his trap lines, a hard, cold business that yielded little, but it was all he had. The horse was 100 yards from his cabin, a good saddle mount, run clean to death. That meant trouble. His first thought was raiders. His second was the law. He did not know which was worse. He moved slowly, keeping to the low ground, his eyes scanning the blur of the storm. Nothing, just the wind and the growing dark. He saw the mound by his door. It was not his woodpile. He circled, approaching the cabin from the east. Using the wind to cover his sound, his hand was steady on the rifle stock. He lived alone because he preferred it. The world outside was loud and greedy, and he wanted no part of it. He had built this place with his own hands, cut the pine, chinked it with mud and straw. It was his, and he would defend it. He got closer. It was not a man, it was a pile of rags. Then he saw the white lace frozen to the snow. He lowered the rifle, his breath catching. He had not seen a woman in 8 months, and never one like this. He knelt. She was small, half buried in the drift. He brushed the snow from her face. It was blue-white, lips cracked. Ice clung to her eyelashes. He put a rough, gloved finger against her neck, pressing under the jaw. He waited. A faint, thready pulse, a flicker. He cursed, low and soft. He looked back at the dead horse, then at the sky. This was not his business. She was dead already. She just did not know it. Leaving her was the smart thing. She was someone's, and that someone would come looking. He stood up, ready to go inside, to bar the door and wait out the storm. He looked down at her face again. She looked impossibly young, her features fine-boned, peaceful in her near death. She was not of this world. She was like a broken bird, fallen from a faraway storm. "Damnation," Luke muttered. He slung the rifle over his shoulder, bent, and slid his arms under her. She weighed almost nothing. He lifted her. She felt like a bundle of frozen sticks and cloth. He kicked the door open with his boot. The cabin was nearly as cold inside as out, but it was still. The wind moaned at the corners but could not get in. He carried her past his small, neat stack of traps, past his workbench. He laid her on his cot. It was a simple frame of pine, a mattress stuffed with straw, and covered in 2 thick wool blankets. It was the only soft thing in the cabin. He did not light the lamp. Oil was too precious. He went to the stone fireplace and knelt. With methodical, practiced movements, he struck flint to steel, catching the spark in his tinderbox. He blew on the ember, feeding it slivers of dry pine bark until a small, clean flame bloomed. He fed it larger kindling, then a split log. The fire caught, orange light flickering against the smoke-darkened beams of the ceiling. He turned back to the woman. She had not moved. He pulled off his gloves. His hands were large, crisscrossed with old scars, the knuckles busted. He was gentle. He brushed the ice from her hair. It was dark, the color of wet walnut. He knew what had to be done. It had to be done fast. He started with her feet. He found his skinning knife, the one he kept sharp as a razor, and cut away the rags of her stockings. He flinched at what he saw. Her feet were raw, the skin split and bleeding, the toes a waxy, bluish-white, frostbite, bad. He grabbed a handful of snow from the bucket by the door and began to rub her feet. He rubbed hard, bringing the blood back, ignoring the way the skin broke under his rough hands. He worked without expression, his face set in grim lines. Then he had to get the wet clothes off. He could not wait. The cold was in her, and it would kill her from the inside out. He unfastened the ragged cloak. Beneath it, the wedding dress was a ruin, frozen to her skin. He tried the buttons on the back, but his fingers were too thick, and the tiny pearl buttons were coated in ice. He used the knife. He slid it carefully under the silk bodice, cutting the laces and the cloth straight up the back. He kept his eyes on his work, not on the curve of her hip or the line of her shoulder. He was a man used to solitude, and her presence felt like a violation, a danger. But he was also a man who understood the rules of the high country. You did not let things die if you could help it. He peeled the frozen layers away, the silk, the cotton chemise, all of it stiff with ice. He worked quickly, clinically, revealing skin that was mottled blue and white. He tossed the ruined clothes near the fire, where they began to hiss and steam. He wrapped her in his driest wool blanket, the thick, scratchy one he kept for the worst nights. He chafed her arms and legs through the wool, forcing the warmth in, forcing the life to stay. He worked for nearly an hour. The fire snapped. Outside, the storm settled into a deep, steady roar. The small cabin felt like the only solid place on earth. He pulled a three-legged stool near the cot and sat, watching her. He was a man built for this landscape. His shoulders were broad, his frame weathered. The scars on his hands were matched by a thin, white line that cut from his left temple to his jaw, pulling one side of his mouth into a permanent, grim set. He hadn't spoken to another human being in 6 weeks. He hadn't wanted to. He watched her breathe. It was shallow, but it was steady. He picked up the ruined dress, feeling the fine, expensive silk. He looked at her hands, soft and uncalloused, save for the raw flesh where she gripped the locket. This was trouble. This was a woman from the other world, the world of towns and bankers and lawmen, a world he had left behind in Wyoming, under a sky red with gunfire. Clara woke to 2 things, warmth and pain. The warmth was a heavy, scratchy weight on her. The pain was a fire in her feet, 1,000 hot needles jabbing into the flesh. She gasped, her eyes flying open. The world was dark, lit only by low, flickering orange light. She smelled wood smoke and pine. She was in a room. She was not in the snow. A shadow moved by the fire. It was a man. Clara's mind, fogged with cold and exhaustion, leaped. He found me, Miles. Terror, pure and absolute, shot through her. She scrambled backward on the cot, the wool blanket pooling at her waist. She was naked beneath it. "No," she breathed, her voice a raw croak. "Do not touch me. Stay back." She fumbled, her hands searching for a weapon. Her fingers hit something cold on a small table beside the cot. Wood and steel. A knife. She grabbed it. It was heavy. She pointed it at the shadow, but her arm shook so badly she could barely lift it. The man did not move. He was a large silhouette against the fire. He slowly raised his hands, palms out. "Easy, girl," he said. His voice was not Miles's. Miles's voice was high and thin. This voice was low, rough, like rocks grinding together. "You're safe," the man said. He did not move closer. "The storm. You were outside." Clara blinked, trying to make sense of the room. The low ceiling with dark beams, the walls of rough, chinked logs, a pair of snowshoes hanging by the door, traps piled neatly. This was not a hotel room. This was not Miles. The man stepped sideways, letting the firelight catch his face. He was not Miles. This man's face was hard, weathered by sun and wind. A long, pale scar cut down one side, making his expression severe. He looked dangerous, but it was a different danger. It was the danger of the wilderness, not the cruelty of a parlor. He looked at the knife in her hand. He looked at her bare shoulders. He looked tired. The realization washed over her. He had not hurt her. He had saved her. He had brought her in. He had taken off her frozen clothes. The knife clattered from her numb fingers, falling onto the dirt floor. The terror did not vanish. It just collapsed. The escape, the fall, the dead horse, the cold, the wedding she had fled, the father who had sold her. It all broke at once. She crumpled, pulling the blanket tight to her chin, and she wept. It was not the desperate, panicked sobbing of the snow. It was a hollow, defeated sound, the weeping of a soul that had run as far as it could. Luke Mallory watched her. He did not move to comfort her. He was not a comforting man. He let her cry, waiting as he would wait for a trapped animal to tire itself out. When her sobs quieted into dry, racking shudders, he moved. He dipped a tin cup into the water bucket near the door and held it out to her. She stared at it, then at him. Her eyes were wide, red-rimmed, full of animal fear. "Water," he said. She took it with a trembling hand. She drank, the water so cold it hurt her throat. Who are you?" "Luke Mallory. This is my cabin." He gestured to the door. "You were by the door." "My horse," she whispered, remembering. "Dead," he said, not unkindly, just a fact. "Run to death." Clara closed her eyes. "You cannot stay," Luke said. Her eyes snapped open. "You are throwing me out." "No," he said, his voice flat. He pointed to the single window, which was a solid sheet of white, the wind rattling the frame. "You cannot leave. The storm. It will last, maybe days." "I have to go," she insisted, trying to sit up. The pain in her feet made her cry out. "They are looking for me." "No one is looking for anyone in this," Luke said. "Not even God is out tonight. You will die before you take 10 steps. You almost did." He picked up the knife from the floor and slid it back into the sheath on his belt. The motion was calm, practiced. Clara pulled the blanket tighter. You will not." "I will not harm you," he said, cutting her off. "I want nothing from you, but you will not leave this cabin, not until the storm clears. You will bring the world to my door, and I will not have it. But I will not have you die either." It was not a request. It was a statement of terms. She was his prisoner, not a prisoner of his will, but of the weather, trapped in this tiny, smoke-filled room with a scarred stranger. I agree," she whispered. She had no other choice. "Good." He turned his back to her. A clear dismissal. He went to the fire, added another log. He took his own blanket, a thinner, more worn one, from a peg. He walked to the far side of the cabin, near the door, as far from her cot as he could get. He sat on the floor, his back against the wall, and wrapped the blanket around his shoulders. He laid his rifle across his lap. "Sleep," he said. "You need it." Clara watched him. He did not look at her again. He stared at the fire, but his gaze seemed to be somewhere else, somewhere far beyond the rough log walls. She lay back down, exhausted to her very marrow. The wool was scratchy against her skin. The fire was warm. The wind shrieked, a constant reminder of the white death outside. She drifted into an uneasy sleep, her dreams filled with visions of falling snow and the sound of men's voices. She woke hours later, gasping, her heart hammering. The fire had burned low. The cabin was in shadows. She looked across the small space. Luke Mallory had not moved. He was not asleep. He was sitting exactly as she had left him, awake, his rifle resting on his knees. He was staring into the dying embers, a sentinel guarding his tiny, isolated world. He watched the flames, but he was not seeing them. He was seeing a red sky over Wyoming, He was smelling gunpowder, not pine smoke. He was hearing the crack of a pistol, not the howl of the wind. He remembered the stillness of a man falling in the dust, and the silence that came after. He glanced at the woman sleeping on his cot. She was trouble. She was the world. Come to find him, and he knew, better than most, what the world did to people who had nowhere left to run. The world shrank to 4 log walls and the sound of the wind. It was a living thing, that sound. It did not stop. It moaned at the corners, screamed over the roof, and pressed against the heavy plank door with a steady, searching force. The snow piled up the walls, covering the single window until the cabin was plunged into a perpetual twilight, lit only by the low, hungry flames in the fireplace. The first day, Clara slept. She drifted in and out of a heavy, exhausted state, her body fighting the frostbite in her feet. The pain was a dull, hot throb. Luke Mallory moved around her with a quietness that was almost unnerving. He was a ghost in his own home. He tended the fire, checked her feet with a rough, impersonal touch, and left a cup of water and a strip of dried venison on the stool by the cot. She ate because she knew she must, the jerky tough and salty in her raw throat. By the second day, the storm's monotony was a kind of madness. There was no morning, no night, only the endless howl and the flickering orange light. The silence inside the cabin grew heavy, thick with unspoken things. She watched him. He seemed untroubled by the isolation. He seemed built for it. He mended a snowshoe, his scarred hands working the wet rawhide with practiced, efficient movements. He cleaned his rifle, disassembled and oiled, with a lover's care. He had given her clothes. They were his, old and worn, smelling of pine smoke, soap, and a faint, clean scent of the cold that clung to him. A wool shirt, so large it hung to her knees, and trousers she had to roll up 5 times and tie with a bit of rope. Dressed in them, her fear of him began to change. He had stripped her of her frozen wedding dress to save her life, but he had covered her again. He had not looked at her in a way that made her feel ashamed. He barely looked at her at all. On the 3rd day, the cold inside the cabin became biting. The woodpile stacked against the inner wall was shrinking. "You have to eat more," he said, his first words in nearly 24 hours. He was stirring a pot of beans over the fire. "But to eat, the fire must burn. The fire needs wood." He gestured to the pile. "There is more outside, under the lean-to, but I will not be the only one working to stay alive." He was not being cruel. It was a fact, stated as plainly as the storm itself. She was a burden, and he was reminding her to carry her own weight. I do not know how," she whispered, her voice still hoarse. "I will teach you." He took her to the small, neatly stacked pile by the door. He picked up the hatchet. "This is for splitting kindling. The axe is for rounds. You will use the hatchet." He set a small log on end. "You stand so, feet apart. You keep your eye on the wood, not on your hands." He showed her, once. The hatchet swung, and the log split with a clean thwack. He handed the tool to her. It was heavy. She lifted it, took aim, and swung. The hatchet glanced off the wood, skittering dangerously near her ankle. She cried out and dropped it. She waited for him to yell, to call her useless. Miles would have struck her for such clumsiness. Her father would have sighed with disappointment. Luke Mallory just bent, picked up the hatchet, and placed it back in her hands. His fingers brushed hers, calloused and warm. "Again," he said, his voice quiet. "Do not fight it. Let the weight do the work." He stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body in the cold air. "Hold it firm. Now!" She swung again. This time, the blade bit, lodging in the wood. "Good," he said. He did not praise. He just stated fact. Again. She worked for an hour, her arms aching, her soft hands already blistering. But with each split log, her fear of him chipped away. He was not a monster. He was a man who understood work. He was teaching her how to survive in his world. And in doing so, he was giving her back a piece of herself. That night, as they ate the thin bean soup, the silence felt different. It was no longer empty.
"The scars,"
she said, nodding toward his hands as he held his tin cup.
"How did you get them?"
He looked down at his knuckles, the old white lines that crisscrossed the skin. "Work," he said. "Rope, barbed wire."
"And the one on your face?"
He did not look up. He traced the rim of his cup with his thumb. "An argument." His voice was flat, a stone skipping on a frozen pond. The subject was closed. She tried again, gesturing to the tiny, cramped space.
"Why do you live here, all alone?"
He looked at her then, his eyes a clear, cold gray, like the sky outside. "I prefer it. But the people, the towns, what about 'em?" he asked. "Full of noise, full of greed. The railroad comes, and they think it's progress. It's just a faster way to bring in fools and carry out what's worth having." "Like the mines," she offered, remembering talk from her father's parlor. "The mines?" he scoffed. "They tear up the mountains for gold, turn the streams to mud, and the ranchers, they come with their thousands of head, tearing up the grass, claiming every flat piece of land and stringing wire to keep everyone else out. They're all the same. They want to own everything." He spoke with a low, simmering anger that startled her. This quiet man was full of fire. The talk of ranchers and claims seemed to open a door in her. He had judged the world. Maybe he would not judge her.
The man I was to marry,"
she began, her voice so low he had to lean forward to hear her.
"His father is one of those men, a banker.
He owns half of Helena, or thinks he does." Luke watched her, his expression unreadable.
"He owns my father?"
Clara continued, the shame burning in her throat.
"My father, he likes cards. He likes whiskey. He made promises he could not keep. The banker, he offered to erase the debt. For me."
She did not need to say more. It was an old story in the West, a daughter traded like livestock. "The son," Luke said. It was not a question.
"Miles."
She whispered his name, and the air in the cabin seemed to get colder.
"He is cruel. I have seen him, the way he treats the servants, the way he whipped a horse for stumbling."
She clenched her hands, the blisters stinging.
"His hands are soft and damp, and I could not let him."
She stopped, unable to say the words. She had run from a life that was worse than death in the snow. Luke's jaw tightened. The scar on his face went white. He stared into the fire, his whole body rigid. He looked like a wolf scenting danger, every muscle tense to spring. He said nothing, but his silence was more potent than any words of comfort. He did not pity her. He believed her, and he was angry. That anger, felt on her behalf, was a strange, bracing comfort. He was a man who understood cruelty, and he had taken her side without even knowing it. The storm raged on. Day 4, Day 5. The world was snow and wind and the inside of a pine box. Their lives became a shared ritual, small and intimate through necessity. They moved around each other in the narrow space, a quiet, clumsy dance. When he rose in the dark to feed the fire, she would wake, watch his shadow. When she tended her feet, soaking them in snow-melted water he'd warmed by the fire, he would sit with his back to her, giving her privacy, but his very presence was a protection. They ran out of jerky. The beans were low. Luke went out into the white, blinding fury, tethered to the cabin by a rope, to check his traps. He came back an hour later, caked in ice, with 2 rabbits. He skinned them with practiced speed, and the cabin filled with the rich, savage smell of roasting meat. They ate in silence, a shared, desperate gratitude. That night, the fragile peace shattered. Clara was on the cot, drifting in a half-sleep. Luke was on his stool by the fire, his head nodded forward,
rifle still across his lap. The cabin was dark. The fire burned down to red embers. The wind changed its tune. It hit the door with a sudden, violent thump. The rope that Luke used as an extra latch creaked, a sound like a heavy boot stepping on a loose floorboard. Clara's eyes flew open. Her heart stopped. "The door! He's here!" She did not think. She screamed. It was not a small cry of fear. It was a raw, lung-tearing shriek of absolute terror. She scrambled off the cot, falling to the cold dirt floor, crab-walking backward until she hit the wall. "No, no, Miles, do not! Stay away!" Luke was on his feet before the scream had even ended. He was not a man who woke slowly. He moved through the darkness like an animal, crossing the 10 feet between them in 2 strides. He did not light the lamp. He just found her, a trembling heap in the shadows. He put his hands on her shoulders, hard. "Clara, stop it! It is the wind!" His voice was a low growl, meant to cut through the panic, but she was lost in it, shaking, fighting him, thinking he was him. "Please, no, I will not let you—" "Clara!" He gave her a rough shake. "It is me, Luke. You are in the cabin. You are safe. Listen!" He held her still. The wind howled and hit the door again. Thump, creak. "It is the wind," he said, his voice softer now. "Just the wind on the door. Nothing more." She stopped fighting. Her body went limp, the terror draining away, leaving a bone-deep tremor. He was still holding her shoulders. His hands were large, solid. They burned through the thin wool of his shirt. He was real. The man in her head was not. I am sorry," she stammered, tears of humiliation stinging her eyes. I dreamed." "I know," he said. He held her for a beat longer. It was not a comforting embrace. It was a grounding. It was a man holding a panicked horse, waiting for the trembling to stop. But it was the first time he had touched her with anything other than impersonal care. His hands were heavy, strong, and safe. He let go, one hand at a time. The air rushed in where his hands had been, and her skin felt cold. "It is all right," he said gruffly. He stepped back, putting distance between them. "Go back to sleep. The storm is all it is." He went back to his stool, but neither of them slept. The touch lingered in the air between them, a new sound beneath the howl of the wind. The next day, everything was different. The storm had not broken, but the spell of their isolation had. They were no longer just 2 people trapped. They were a man and a woman. Clara was intensely aware of him, the breadth of his shoulders as he split wood, the way the firelight caught the gray in his hair at the temples, the way he moved, with a quiet, contained strength. The cabin felt smaller. When she handed him the dipper, their fingers brushed. The small shock of it made her draw her breath in. When they passed each other, their arms brushed. He would pull back, as if burned. The wind had worried a patch of chinking loose from the window frame. The rag he had stuffed in it was flapping, letting in a fine, dusting spray of snow. "I can fix that," she said, needing to do something, needing to break the tension. She stood on the small bench to reach it. She pulled the rag out, trying to push the frozen mud and straw back into the crack. Her fingers, still tender and blistered, were clumsy. "Here." Luke's voice was right behind her. He stepped up, standing not on the bench, but beside it. He was close, so close she could feel the radiating warmth of his body. She did not move, frozen in place. He reached past her, his arm brushing her shoulder. "You have to pack it tight." She looked at his hand as he worked the chinking. It was inches from her face, scarred, strong, steady. And then she saw it. His hand was trembling. It was not a violent shake, but a fine, deep tremor, a vibration of contained force. It was not the cold. They were standing near the fire. He was trembling from being near her. He finished, his movements quick and jerky. He pulled his hand back, clenching it into a fist at his side, as if angry at it for betraying him. "Thank you," she whispered. He just nodded, his jaw tight, and moved away, putting the width of the cabin between them. The tension became a physical thing, an unbearable pressure. It was in the way he looked at her, his eyes lingering for a second too long before he looked away. It was in the way she held her breath when he passed. They were two poles of a magnet, straining toward each other, held apart by the rules of a world that did not exist in this cabin, but that waited for them just outside the door. That night, it became too much. She was tending the fire. He was sitting on his stool, so close she could have reached out and touched his knee. He was polishing the steel of a trap, his movements methodical, rhythmic. She knelt by the hearth, adding a small log. The heat was intense on her face. She felt unsteady, lightheaded from the close air, the lack of food, the impossible nearness of him. She pushed the log into place and leaned back. Rising, she stumbled. It was a small misstep on the uneven stone of the hearth. Her hand flew out to catch herself. It landed on his leg, flat against his thigh. The world stopped. The wind died. The fire went silent. He froze. His hand stopped polishing the trap. She did not pull away. She could not. Her palm was flat against the hard, solid muscle of his thigh, the rough denim warm from the fire. She could feel the strength of him, the sheer, solid reality of him. She kept her hand there for 1, 2, 3 heartbeats. Slowly, he turned his head. His eyes met hers. His face, in the firelight, was a mask of torment. The scar was stark, but his eyes were darker, full of a raw, aching loneliness she recognized as her own. It was not the look of a predator. It was the look of a starving man seeing bread. She saw the pull in his gaze, the desperate human need, and she felt it answer in herself. She snatched her hand back as if the denim had been hot coals. I am sorry," she stammered, her face burning. "I slipped." Luke said nothing. He did not look at her. He looked down at the trap in his hands. His knuckles were white. He took a long, slow breath, the air shuddering into his lungs. Then, deliberately, he returned to his work, polishing the steel with short, violent strokes. The moment was over. But it was not. It was a wound that had been opened. Later, in the darkness, the silence was absolute, save for the wind. Clara lay on the cot, her eyes wide open, staring at the dark beams of the ceiling. She could still feel the hard warmth of him under her hand. Across the room, she heard Luke shift on the hard floor. He turned, his back to her, settling himself with a sigh that was half a groan. They lay there, sleepless, separated by 10 feet of darkness and a chasm of fear. They both wanted the same thing: warmth, a touch, a kindness in the middle of the long, cold storm. And they were both terrified of it, terrified of what it would mean, what it would cost, and how the world outside would surely punish them for it. The night ended in that quiet, shared heartbreak, each of them alone, together, in the dark. The first sound that broke the world was a drip. It was a slow, heavy plop of water from the eaves, a sound Clara had not heard in what felt like a lifetime. The constant, shrieking companion of the wind had finally quieted, its voice receding to a mournful, distant sigh. After the scream, there was the drip, then another, and another, a rhythm of release. Luke was already at the door, his hand on the heavy plank. He did not open it. Not yet. He just stood listening, his head bowed. "It is breaking," he said. He pulled the heavy bar away and cracked the door. A sliver of watery gray light cut into the smoky cabin, striking the floor like a blade. It was the first true daylight in nearly a week. It illuminated the grime, the dust motes dancing in the air, the exhaustion etched around his eyes. The air that snaked in was not the sharp, dry cold of the blizzard. It was a new cold, damp, heavy, and raw. It smelled of wet pine and, faintly, of mud. The thaw had begun, and with it, the fragile peace of their isolation shattered. The snow, which had been their fortress, was now their betrayer. It was melting, revealing the cabin, revealing their tracks, revealing her. The world they had held at bay was returning, drop by heavy drop. Luke turned from the door, his face grim. The light, weak as it was, seemed to expose them. He looked at her, truly looked at her, not as a shadow by the fire or a bundle on his cot, but as Clara Ellison, a woman from Helena, a runaway bride. He saw the fine, dark brows, the mouth that was too soft for this country, the shadows of fear in her eyes. And he saw the clothes she wore, his clothes. A dark flush rose up his neck. He turned away, busying himself at the fire, his movements suddenly rough. "You will need to leave," he said. The word struck her like a slap. She had known they were coming, but the sound of them, spoken into the new, quiet air, felt brutal. She stood up from the cot, her feet now healing into a mass of tender, pink skin, protesting as they took her weight. "Leave?" she said, her voice thin. "Into what? The snow is still deep. I have no horse, no food." "It will be passable in a day. 2, he said, not looking at her. He slammed the cast-iron pot onto the fire hook. "I can give you food, enough for a few days. You head south. You will hit the trading post on the mussel shell. You can get a ride from there, back to wherever you came from." "Back!" The word was acid. "Back to Miles? Back to my father's house? That is not a life. That is a cage. I will not go back." "You cannot stay here," he said, and his voice was hard, harder than she had ever heard it. "Why not?" she challenged, her own fear turning to fire. "I am not afraid of work. I can cook. I can clean your cabin. I can learn to mend. I can chop the wood. I will earn my keep." "Earn your keep?" He finally turned, his face a mask of anger and something she could not name. It looked like despair. "You think that is what this is? This is not a town, girl, where you can hire on. This is my claim, a man and a woman, alone. After a storm?" He gave a short, bitter laugh. "The first trapper who passes, the first rider from town. The story will be in the saloon by nightfall." "I do not care about stories," she said, clutching the oversized wool shirt at her throat. "You do not care?" he shot back, taking a step toward her. "You do not even know the world you are in. They will not call you a runaway. They will not call you a survivor. They will call you ruined. They will call you a fallen woman, and they will call me." He stopped, his jaw working. "What?" she pressed, her voice trembling. "What will they call you?" "It does not matter," he said, turning his back on her again. "You deserve a life, a real one, a husband, children. You cannot have that if you stay here with me. I will not be the man who takes that from you." His words were meant to save her, but they felt like a judgment. He was casting her out, not because he wanted to, but because he was a coward. "A life?" she cried, tears of pure, hot frustration stinging her eyes. "The life you are sending me back to is a lie. It is a performance, and the man I am supposed to marry, he is a monster. You are—" She stopped, her breath catching. "You are just afraid. Afraid of what people will say. Afraid of the rumors. I thought you were different. I thought you did not care for the world and its rules." "You know nothing about me," he growled, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. "I know you hide," she accused, stepping closer, her own anger making her bold. "You hide from the world, and now you are hiding from me." "Hiding?" He spun on her, his face dark with a fury that went beyond their argument. "You think I am hiding? You know what it is to be hunted, not by gossip, girl, not by rumors, but by men with guns, men with badges. Do you know what it is to look over your shoulder every day for 10 years? To know that one wrong word, one face seen in the wrong town, will mean a rope. He was breathing hard, the scar on his face livid against his pale skin. He was not talking about her. He was talking about himself. "You know nothing," he whispered, the anger draining away, leaving him hollow. "You do not understand what it means to be a man like me. I have nothing to offer you but this. A cold cabin, a life of looking back. I am poison, Clara, and I will not poison you." The fight was over. He had won. He had bared a piece of his own broken soul, and she had no answer for it. The silence that fell was worse than the storm. It was dead, heavy, and full of grief. He had rejected her. He was sending her away. She went to the woodpile. She would not be useless. Not for the last day or two. She grabbed the hatchet, her movements jerky. She would chop the wood. She would do the work she had promised. She worked in a blind fury, swinging the hatchet with a reckless strength. The blisters on her hands, which had been healing, tore open. She ignored the sting. She swung again, a clumsy, angry blow. The hatchet glanced off the log, and the sharp, wooden handle slammed hard into the delicate bones of her left wrist. Pain, white and blinding, shot up her arm. She cried out, dropping the hatchet. She cradled her wrist, waves of nausea rolling over her. Luke was beside her in an instant, his anger gone, replaced by that gruff, immediate concern. "Let me see," he commanded. "No," she wept, turning from him. It was the humiliation of it, the final proof of her uselessness. "It is fine. I am fine." "Do not be a fool," he said, and he took her arm gently, pulling her toward the firelight. He pushed up the sleeve of his own shirt that she wore. Her wrist was already swelling, a sickening bluish puffiness rising under the skin. "It is not broken," he said, his rough fingers probing the bones with a surprising gentleness. "But it is a bad sprain." He went to his small shelf and came back with a strip of clean cotton cloth and a tin of salve that smelled of pine tar and wintergreen. He rubbed the salve onto her skin, his touch impersonal, careful. Then he began to wrap the wrist, his large hands deft. She watched him. He was so close. His head was bent to his task, the firelight catching the gray at his temples. She could smell the smoke on his skin. He was tying the cloth, his motions efficient. The silence was unbearable. He was leaving a long tail on the knot. "It is too loose," she whispered. He looked up, his gray eyes meeting hers. They were inches apart. She could see the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the pull of the scar, the deep, aching loneliness he could not hide. "It will swell," he said, his voice rough. "No," she said. She did not know where the words came to her. She only knew she could not bear the silence, could not bear the distance he was putting between them. She wanted to break through his defenses, to make him see her, to make him stay. She leaned in, her shoulder pressing against his chest. She could feel the solid, steady beat of his heart. "Please," she whispered, her own voice trembling. "Tie me tighter." He froze. His hands, which had been so steady, stopped. She pressed herself closer, her free hand coming up to rest on his shirt, over his heart. "Luke, please." It was a confession. It was a plea. It had nothing to do with the bandage. She felt the tremor start in him. It was the same one she had seen in his hand at the window, but this time it was his whole body, a deep, shuddering vibration of a man holding back a lifetime of need. His breath hitched. "Clara," he breathed, his voice a broken thing. You do not know." "I do," she said. She looked at his mouth. "I am not afraid." He closed his eyes. It was a look of pure torment, a second of surrender. And then he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was hesitant at first, then desperate, a collision of two people who had been starved. It was clumsy and raw. It tasted of wood smoke and salt and the metallic tang of her tears. His scarred, Rough hands came up, not to her waist, but to grip her shoulders, as if he were holding on to keep from falling. She kissed him back, pouring all her fear, her anger, and her desperate, aching loneliness into it. It was not a kiss of love. It was a kiss of survival. It was two people in a cold, harsh world, seeking a moment of human warmth, a rebellion against the despair that waited for them both. He broke it first, pulling back as if he had been burned. He stared at her, his eyes wide, horrified. The reality of what they had done crashed down on him. He looked at her, at the tears on her face, the bandaged wrist, the trust she had just placed in him. And he saw his own failure. He was the man he had sworn he would not be. He had taken advantage of her fear, her loneliness. He had ruined her. "No," he whispered. He staggered back, away from her, his hands scrubbing at his mouth. "God forgive me." He grabbed his coat from the peg. He did not grab his rifle. "Luke, wait," she cried. He ripped the door open and plunged outside into the gray, melting world. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving her alone in the sudden, terrible silence of the cabin. He did not come back. Clara sat by the fire, her body trembling, her wrist throbbing, her lips still burning from his touch. The cabin, which had been her fortress, now felt like a prison. The hours passed. The watery daylight faded. The drip, drip, drip of the thaw was the only sound. She fed the fire, her movements numb. She waited. Night fell. The cabin grew cold. He was still out there. She could not bear it. He was punishing himself, staying out in the damp chill, in the melting snow and the rain that had begun to fall. She pulled on the worn boots he had found for her, a trapper's old moccasins stuffed with wool. She grabbed his thinner blanket from the peg and opened the door. The night was black and wet. The temperature had risen, and a cold rain was falling, turning the deep snow to a heavy, collapsing slush. "Luke!" she called. The sound was small against the dripping trees. "Luke!" She found him. He was not far. He was sitting on the woodpile under the lean-to, his back against the cabin wall, his head in his hands. He was soaked to the skin, his coat dripping, shivering in the dark. She went to him. He did not look up. She stood in front of him for a long moment. He looked broken, a man broken by his own guilt, his own past. She did not speak. She did not offer words of comfort or forgiveness. Words were useless. She sat down beside him on the wet logs, in the cold rain, and she did the only thing she could. She unfolded the dry blanket, wrapped it around his shoulders, and then she slid her small, blistered hand into his large, frozen one. He flinched as if expecting a blow, but he did not pull away. His hand was like ice. She held it, her fingers lacing with his, sharing her warmth. They sat in silence for an hour. The rain fell, the snow melted, and in the darkness, something fragile and real, something stronger than the kiss, began to take root. He did not speak. She did not speak. They just held hands, two survivors in the dark. Finally, his shivering slowed. He squeezed her hand, a single, sharp pressure. He stood, pulling her up with him. They went inside. He barred the door. Without a word, he took the blanket from his shoulders and wrapped it around her, chafing her arms until the feeling came back. He sat her by the fire. He took his own place on the floor, across the room. But this time, when he looked at her, the guilt was still there, but the horror was gone. It was replaced by a quiet, grim acceptance. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The next day, the sun came out. It was a weak, watery sun, but it was real. The snow sank, turning the world into a sea of brown slush and mud. Luke was all business. The thaw meant travel. Travel meant pursuers. "You have to know how to protect yourself," he said. He took his rifle from the pegs. "I have never fired a gun," she said,
her voice small. "You will learn." He took her outside. The air was clean, sharp. He set up a tin can on a fence post 50 yards away. He showed her how to hold the rifle, how to brace it against her shoulder. It was heavy, the wood smooth, the steel cold. "It will kick," he warned. "Do not be afraid of it. Breathe out. Squeeze the trigger. Do not pull it." She lifted the rifle. It was impossibly heavy. She aimed. The barrel wavered. "Steady," he said. His voice was close by her ear. "You have courage. You ran. You survived the storm. This is just a tool." She took a breath. She squeezed. The explosion was deafening. A roar that split the quiet valley. The rifle butt slammed into her shoulder, knocking her back a step, and she cried out. The can was untouched. She looked at him, mortified. A strange sound rose from his chest. It was a low chuckle. He was smiling. It was the first time she had seen it. The scar pulled at his mouth, but his eyes, his gray eyes, were full of light. "You flinched," he said, "but you did not drop it." He showed her again. "Keep your cheek down, sight down the barrel, see the can." She tried again and again. On the fourth shot, she hit it. The can leaped into the air with a satisfying ping. A laugh, bright and sudden, bubbled out of her. She had done it. He laughed with her, a real open sound that echoed in the clearing. It was a sound of such profound relief, such simple, stolen joy, that she felt her heart ache. In that moment, he was not a scarred recluse. He was just a man, laughing in the sun. The sound of their laughter died, stolen by a new sound. It came from the valley below, the wet, rhythmic thump and squelch of horses moving through mud. More than one. Luke's smile vanished. His hands shot out, grabbing her arm, pulling her back, shoving her toward the cabin. "Inside, now," he hissed. "Get away from the window." The hoofbeats grew closer. Men, searching. The brief peace was over. The world had found them. The riders did not come to the cabin. Not at first. Luke held up a hand, his head cocked toward the door. The sound he had heard was not just the drip of the thaw. It was the suck and pull of hooves in deep, wet mud. Clara froze, her hand still on the rifle stock. The horses were moving slow, picking their way up the valley. There were several. They stopped, not at the cabin, but further down, maybe a quarter mile, where old Jed Swanson had his dugout. Jed was the closest thing Luke had to a neighbor, a half-mad old prospector who kept to himself. Luke moved to the window, pressing himself flat against the log wall, peering through the small, muddy pane. He could not see them, but he could hear them. The voices carried on the damp, heavy air. One voice was loud, arrogant, and laced with an eastern drawl. "We know he came this way. A man on foot, with a woman in tow. She was taken, kidnapped from her fiancé." "Kidnapped?" Jed's reedy voice cracked. "Ain't seen no woman. Ain't seen no one but Mallory, and he don't take kindly to visitors." "Mallory," the first voice repeated, the name tasting like a threat. "The one in the high cabin? We have a warrant. A federal warrant for the arrest of one Clara Ellison, a runaway. And for the man who's holding her, there's a reward. Old man." "Don't want no reward," Jed wheezed. "I told you, I ain't seen nothing. Now get off my claim." There was a dull, heavy sound, a thud. Jed gave a short, wet cry. "Maybe that clears your memory." A second, rougher voice said, "We will be back. You see anything, you ride to town, you hide 'em. We will burn you out." Clara had crept up beside Luke. Her face was bloodless. She had heard it all. The warrant, the lie, kidnapped. Miles had turned her escape into a crime, and Luke into a criminal. The horses began to move again, their hooves churning the mud. They were heading up the trail, toward them. "Back!" Luke hissed. He grabbed her, pulling her away from the window, into the darkest corner of the cabin. "Do not move! Do not breathe!" He snatched his rifle and stood beside the door, his body tense as a coiled spring. He was not a man who would be taken easily. Clara pressed her back to the wall, her bandaged wrist held tight to her chest. She could feel her heart, a frantic bird in a cage. The sound of the horses grew louder, a slow, ominous drumming. They were just outside. Clara could smell the wet leather of their tack, the animal sweat. "This must be it," the Eastern voice said. "There's smoke from the chimney." "Luke Mallory," the rough voice called out. "We are deputies of the territory. We have a warrant. Open this door in the name of the law." Luke did not move. His eyes were fixed on the door, his finger resting on the trigger. "We know you have the girl. Mallory, send her out, and it will go easy on you." Silence. Only the drip of water from the eaves. "He ain't answering, boss," the rough one said. "He's in there," the Eastern voice said, lower now. "I can feel it. Let us smoke him out." "The warrant's for the girl," the rough one argued. "Not for him, not yet, and not for murder. Miles Holloway wants her back, not burned. We will come back with more men. He cannot run far, not with her." There was a long pause. Clara held her breath until her lungs burned. "All right," the Eastern voice said. "Let us ride, but we will be back, before nightfall, with the whole town." The horses stamped, turning in the mud. The sounds recede. They were gone. For a full minute, neither of them moved. Then Luke let out his breath in a long, slow sigh. He did not relax, but the coiled tension eased. He lowered the rifle. "They will be back," he said. It was not a guess. It was a promise. "And they will not be alone." He turned, and the man she had seen in the last week, the quiet, solitary trapper, was gone. In his place was someone else, a fugitive, a man who knew how to run. His movements were fast, precise, and desperate. "We have to go, now." He grabbed a canvas sack and began throwing his meager supplies into it. The last of the jerky, a handful of dried beans, a small bag of flour, his skinning knife, a whetstone. "There is only one horse," Clara said, her voice shaking. "I know," he said, not looking at her. He was checking his rifle, loading a round into the chamber. "You will ride, I will walk. We head up into the foothills, into the bitter roots. They will not follow us into the high country, not with a thaw." "Luke," she said, her terror making her mind sharp. "They have warrants. They said kidnapped. They will not just stop." "They will stop if they cannot find us," he said, his voice flat. He pulled his own blanket from the cot and rolled it tight, tying it with a leather thong. "They think I am a trapper. They do not know." He stopped, his hands frozen on the rope. "They do not know what?" she pressed, coming to stand beside him. "What do they not know, Luke?" He had told her he was hiding, that he was hunted. She had not understood. Now, with the sound of those voices still ringing in her ears, she did. "Luke, why are you so sure they will hang you?" He was silent for a long time, his back to her. He stared at the wall, at the empty rifle pegs. "Because I have killed a man," he said. The words dropped into the small cabin with a weight of stone. He said it simply, a fact, like the storm is breaking or the wood is low. "It was in Wyoming," he said, his voice quiet, dead. 10 years ago. Seems like 1,000. I had a brother, younger, Samuel. He was not strong. He was gentle, liked books. He had no place in that world, but he tried." He paused, and she could see his shoulders tense, remembering. "We were working a cattle drive. The foreman was a man named Johnson, a big man, proud of his strength. He liked to use the whip. He said it made the men harder. One day, Samuel, he spilled the coffee. It was an accident, just clumsy. Johnson, he started on him.
He said he would teach him a lesson. Luke turned, and his eyes were not in the cabin. They were far away, under that red sky he had dreamt of. He uncoiled the whip. Samuel, he just stood there, waiting for it. He was so afraid he could not even move. I told Johnson to stop. He laughed. He said Samuel was my blood, and my blood was weak. He raised his arm. "What did you do?" Clara whispered, though she already knew. "I was wearing my pistol. I pulled it. I shot him." He looked down at his scarred, trembling hands. Right in the chest. He looked surprised. Then he fell. He was dead before he hit the dust. There was so much blood. He was shaking now, the memory of it running through him. "I killed him. I did not think. I did it to save Samuel." "You saved him," Clara said, her voice thick with tears. "You saved your brother?" "No," Luke said, and this was the word that broke him. "I did not." He looked at her, his face a mask of old, raw grief. "The men, they let me go. They were afraid. I guess I grabbed Samuel and we rode. We ran, but the beating Johnson had given him before, the cold, he was already sick. He died 2 months later, in a line shack in the mountains. He just faded, and I was not there." "What do you mean?" "I was out, hunting, trying to find us food. When I got back, he was gone. He died alone, cold, just like I almost died," she finished in her head. Now she understood the look on his face when he found her. He was not just saving a stranger. He was trying to save his brother, 10 years too late. "I killed a man, Clara," he whispered. "And my brother died anyway. The rancher, Johnson, he had powerful friends. They put a price on my head. Murder. I have been running ever since. I never went home. I am no one. Just Mallory. So you see." He turned back to his packing, his movement stiff. "When they take me back, they will not just ask about you. They will find out who I am, and they will hang me. For kidnapping you, for killing him. It does not matter. The rope is waiting." She stared at his back, at the broad shoulders that carried such an impossible weight. He was a killer. He was a fugitive, and he was the gentlest, most decent man she had ever known. She went to him. She did not cry. Her tears were for her own fear. This was something deeper. She put her hand on his arm. He flinched, but did not pull away. "You are not a monster. Luke," she said, her voice soft but fierce. "You are not like Miles. He hurts people because he likes it. You did it to protect someone you loved. You did it to stop a bully." He kept his back to her, but she felt the tremor in his arm. "You saved me," she said. "You were gentle. You were kind. You are a good man." He slowly turned his head. He looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. He did not believe her. He had lived with his guilt for so long. It was part of his skin, but he wanted to believe her. "We have to go," he said, his voice thick. They fled as the sun began to sink, painting the wet snow in shades of pink and gray. There was no time to cover their tracks. He put her on the horse, his own steady gelding. He piled the saddlebags high. He handed her the rifle. "If you see me fall, you ride," he commanded. "You ride high, and you do not stop." "I will not leave you." "You will," he said, and his look was so fierce it silenced her. He took the reins and began to walk, leading the horse up the steep, muddy game trail, away from the cabin, deeper into the black pines of the foothills. The rain began again as darkness fell. It was not a clean rain. It was a freezing, biting sleet that turned the mud to a treacherous, icy slurry. Luke walked, his head down, pulling the horse. Clara rode, her body numb, the rifle heavy across her lap, her bandaged wrist throbbing with every jolt. They moved in a world of gray shadow and the sound of their own misery.
The horse slipped, its iron shoes finding no purchase. Luke hauled it up, his voice a low, calming rumble. Clara's teeth chattered so hard she thought they would break. After hours, he stopped. He did not dare a fire. They were in a thick grove of fir, the branches hanging low, offering the barest shelter from the ice. He pulled her from the saddle, her legs buckled, numb and useless. He caught her, holding her upright. She was shivering violently, her whole body shaking. "We have to rest," he said. He untied his bedroll. It was soaked. He spread the one remaining dry blanket, the one from his cot, on the ground, pulling it under a low-hanging brow. "Get in!" She crawled under it, and he followed, pulling the wet canvas roll over them both. It was not enough. The cold was a living thing, seeping up from the ground, driving in from the air. Clara could not stop shaking. I can't," she stammered. Luke cursed, a low, frustrated sound. He sat up, pulled her back against his chest, and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tight. He was a wall of solid, shivering muscle. He wrapped the blanket around them both, cocooning them. His body was as cold as hers, but he was solid. She was pressed against his back, his arms locked around her middle, his chin resting on the top of her head. It was not the desperate, frantic closeness of the kiss. It was the closeness of two animals huddled together to survive a storm. She could feel his heart, a slow, steady beat against her shoulder blade. She tried to match her breathing to his. They sat like that for what felt like an eternity, sharing one blanket, one space, one desperate heartbeat. He did not speak. He just held her, sharing his fading warmth, his body a shield against the sleet. Their bond was no longer about attraction or fear. It was this total, desperate reliance. They moved again before dawn, pushing higher, the air thinning. The horse was failing. Luke's face was a gray mask of exhaustion. As the watery sun rose, they found it, tucked into a rocky draw, half hidden by a snowdrift that had yet to melt, was an old mining shack. It was rotten, the roof canted, the door missing, but it was four walls. Luke led the horse inside. The shack was tiny, the floor dirt, the wind whistling through the rotted planks, but it was out of the sleet. He pulled the saddle from the horse, his movement slow. He gave the animal the last of his oats. Clara slid to the ground, her body spent. She crawled to the driest corner and huddled, pulling the wet blanket around her. Luke dropped beside her. He did not have the strength to sit across the room. He sat shoulder to shoulder, their legs touching. They were too tired to be afraid of each other. "They will not find us here," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "They will," she said. Her exhaustion was so deep it felt like truth. "He will, Miles. He will not stop. We are high. He will not risk his men in these hills." "He will," she repeated, her voice dull, lifeless. She was staring at the rotten wall. "He will find me, and he will know." "Know what?" Luke asked, his own fatigue a heavy weight. Clara turned to look at him. Her eyes were huge in her pale, thin face, shadowed with a terror that went beyond the riders, beyond the storm. The secret was too heavy. She could not carry it alone. Not one more step. "I am with child," she whispered. The words hung in the dead, cold air. Luke stared at her. He did not understand. He looked down at her waist, at the bulky men's clothes. "Clara, it is his," she choked out, the shame finally breaking her. "Miles, it was not, one night, at my father's house, after the engagement, he was drunk. He said I was his property, that he was just trying what he had bought." She broke. The weeping was not the panicked sobbing of the cabin. It was a silent, convulsive grief, her body shaking, no sound coming out. Luke was frozen.
He had seen the worst of men, but this was a violation he could not comprehend. It was the act of a man like Johnson, a bully with a whip. He looked at this small, broken woman. He saw her fleeing a wedding. He saw her face down in the snow. He saw her shame, and he felt a rage so pure and so cold it eclipsed his fear, his guilt, everything. It was the same rage he had felt standing over his brother. He did not flinch. He did not pull away. His hand, his scarred, trembling hand, came up. He did not touch her face or her hair. He laid it gently, protectively, on her stomach. Clara stopped crying, her breath catching in a gasp. "He is not your husband," Luke said, his voice a low, rough vow. "He has no claim on you. That is not his—" His gaze was fierce. He was not just looking at her. He was looking at the future. He was looking at the small, innocent life she was carrying. An innocent, like Samuel. "It is a child," he said, his voice gaining strength. "Just a child. It is yours. And I will protect it. I will protect you both. I swear it. He will not touch you again. Either of you." He was claiming them, here, in this ruined, rotten shack. This fugitive killer was vowing to be a father, to be a husband. The shame that had been crushing her cracked. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her body finally, truly, giving up its fight. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. They lay down on the cold dirt floor, wrapped in the one damp blanket. They lay together without shame, without fear. Their closeness was no longer forbidden. It was not desire. It was a fragile, desperate, and unbreakable act of survival. It was the two of them against the entire, cruel world. They slept. Luke woke first. The light in the shack was gray. The sleet had stopped. He rose stiffly, his bones aching. He went to the open doorway, peering out. The valley they had climbed from was spread out below them, a vast white and brown bowl. And from that bowl, 3 plumes of thick, black smoke were rising. They were not from campfires. They were too large, too dark. He looked toward where his cabin had been. 1 plume. He looked toward Jed Swanson's dugout. A second, and a third, further south, where the next homesteader lived. Miles's men were not just searching. They were sending a message. They were burning the homesteads, punishing anyone who might have given them shelter. The hunt was not over. It had just truly begun. The smoke was a stain against the clean, cold sky. It was not the thin, blue wisp of a chimney. It was a thick, greasy black rising from the valley, and it spoke of violation. Luke watched it for a long, still moment. He watched his own life, his small, quiet cabin, burn. He watched the smoke from Jed's dugout and the smoke from the Hansen place further south. Miles was not just pursuing. He was cleansing the earth, burning out any trace of help they had received. "He is thorough," Luke said, his voice flat. He turned from the doorway of the ruined shack, his face a mask of iron. The grief would come later. Now, there was only the running. "They will think we are dead in the cabin, or that we fled south. They will not look high, not yet." He turned to Clara, his gaze so intense it was almost a physical touch. He was no longer just a man hiding. He was a man with a purpose she had given him. "We go west, over the bitter roots. There is a post, a place I heard of years ago. Fort Owen, near the mission. They say it is safe. They say they do not ask questions." Clara nodded. The terror of the night was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve that matched his. She was no longer a runaway bride. She was a survivor. She was a mother. "West," she agreed. The journey was a new kind of hell. The thaw had turned the high country into a treacherous, sodden trap. What looked like solid ground was often a thin crust of snow over a void of icy slush. They had 1 horse, and its strength was failing. Luke walked, leading the animal, testing every step. Clara rode, her body a dull ache, the rifle resting across her lap. The hunger came first. The rabbits and the last of the jerky were gone in a day. The land was barren, scoured by the storm. The animals were still in their winter yards. Lower down, Luke set snares with a desperate, practiced skill, but they came up empty. The world was not yet ready to give up its life. He found roots, bitter and hard, that he peeled with his knife. They chewed them until their jaws ached, the woody fiber a poor substitute for food. The hunger hollowed Clara out, turning her fear into a light-headed, dizzy weakness. Then came the sickness. She would wake in the cold, gray dawn, huddled in their shared blanket, and a wave of nausea would rise so powerful it choked her. She would stumble away from their small, smokeless camp, her body convulsing, heaving up the bitter water and roots from the day before. Luke would stand by, his back to her, a silent, helpless guardian. His guilt was a palpable thing. He could not feed her. He could not protect her from this intimate, internal trial. He could only bring her water in his tin cup and wipe her face with a wet cloth when the spasms passed. He, who had vowed to protect her and the child, could not even give them a piece of bread. He felt like a failure, like the man who had left his brother to die. "It is not your fault," she whispered to him one morning, her voice raw as she leaned back against a pine, shaking. It is the way of it." "It should not be this hard," he said, his voice rough. He hated his own helplessness. "We are alive." "Luke," she said, her hand going to her stomach, a gesture that was becoming constant. "That is all that matters." On the third day, they came to the river. It was not a creek, it was a torrent, a wide, churning artery of melted snow and ice, roaring down from the high peaks. It was slate gray and looked thick, heavy, and impossibly cold. The sound of it was a dull, angry roar that filled the canyon. Luke stood on the bank, staring at it. The horse stamped nervously, its ears pinned back. "There is no other way," he said. "The canyon walls are too steep. We cannot go around." "We will freeze," Clara said, her voice small. "We will freeze if we stay here," he replied. "They are behind us. I can feel it." He checked the saddle, cinching it tight. He tied their meager pack and the rifle high on the back. "Hold on, whatever you do not let go of the saddle horn." He led the horse to the bank. The animal balked, whinnying, its eyes rolling. "Easy," Luke soothed, his hand on its neck, though his voice was tight with his own fear. He grabbed the bridle and stepped into the water. The shock of it made him gasp. It was not water, it was liquid ice. It stole his breath, his legs going numb instantly. He pushed forward, the water surging past his waist, pulling at him. "Come on, boy, come!" The horse plunged in, its front legs dropping, and it began to swim, its large body fighting the current. Luke held onto the bridle, swimming beside its head, kicking, fighting the relentless push of the water. They were halfway across, the main channel. The current was a monster. It grabbed the horse, turning it sideways. The animal panicked, its legs churning, trying to find a foothold that was not there. It reared, a high, desperate sound. Clara screamed. The sudden movement, the angle of the horse, it was too much. Her numb, weak hands lost their grip. She slipped from the saddle. She hit the water and was gone. "Clara!" Luke's roar was lost in the sound of the river. He let go of the horse, his only thought for her. He saw her surface, 10 yards downstream, a flash of her dark hair, her pale face. She was being swept away, tumbled like a piece of driftwood. He did not think. He dove, using the current, swimming with a frantic, desperate strength he did not know he possessed. The cold was 1,000 knives in his skin, his lungs on fire. He saw her again. She was going under. He dove, grabbing, his fingers catching a handful of the rough wool shirt. He had her.
He fought his way back to the bank, dragging her. It took all of his strength. The current fought him for every inch. He clawed at the muddy, icy bank, his body screaming, and hauled her out of the water. She was limp, a dead weight. Her eyes were closed. She was not breathing.
No,
he breathed. The word was a prayer.
No, not you.
He remembered Samuel, dying alone.
No.
He turned her, pressing hard on her back, his large hands forcing the water from her lungs. A small, weak trickle came from her mouth. He turned her over. Her face was blue-white. Still no breath. He put his hands on her chest, pressing, counting.
Clara, breathe! Damn you! Breathe!
Nothing. He bent his head, covering her mouth with his, and blew his own breath into her lungs. A desperate, raw act. He tasted the river, the ice. He did it again. She choked. It was a small, ragged sound, a gasp, a cough. Her body convulsed. Water streamed from her mouth. Her eyes flew open, wide, seeing nothing.
Luke,
she whispered, a sound of pure terror. I am here, he wept, his voice breaking. He collapsed over her, his body shaking, his tears, hot and real, falling onto her cold face. He just held her, whispering her name, over and over. Clara, Clara, I have you. You are safe. He had saved her. This time, he had not been too late. He stripped her of the wet clothes, his hands shaking so badly he could barely work the buttons. He wrapped her in his own dry blanket, the last one. He was in his wet underthings, but he did not feel the cold. He only felt the terror of her near death. He sat, holding her, rocking her, until her shivering slowed. The horse, miraculously, had made it to the other side. It stood on the far bank, dripping, exhausted. They had lost the rifle. It was gone, swept away. They had nothing left but his knife and the pistol at his belt. They found refuge that night, or it found them. Luke was carrying Clara. He had lost his boots in the river, his feet wrapped in rags, but he did not stop. He found a small, hidden shelter, tucked under a granite overhang. It was a wickiup, built of pine boughs and hides. An old woman emerged, her face a map of deep, dark wrinkles. She was Salish, her people's land. She held a skinning knife, her eyes wary. Luke stopped. He did not raise his hands. He just stood, his exhaustion plain. He nodded to Clara in his arms. She is sick, the river. The old woman looked at Clara. She saw the pale face, the blue lips. She saw the slight, new curve of her stomach, which no one else would have noticed. Her gaze softened. She was a widow, her own family long gone. She saw survival. She gestured them inside. It was warm, a small, clean fire burning in the center. She gave them a thick broth of rabbit and herbs. It was the best food Clara had ever tasted. The woman saw Clara's nausea, and she brewed a tea from a bitter root. This, the woman said, her English broken, but clear. Good for child. Clara drank it, and the sickness in her stomach calmed. The woman gave Luke a pair of old, worn moccasins. She looked at his feet, cut and bleeding from the rocks, and shook her head. She gave him a salve. Men, she said, pointing back the way they had come. 3 days passed. Angry men. Guns. They ride fast. She looked at Clara, then at Luke. You go west. Fast. They are close. They stayed only until the moon was high. Luke offered the woman his knife. It was all he had. She shook her head. She took the silver locket from around Clara's neck, looked at it, and then pressed it back into Clara's hand, closing her fingers over it. She pointed west. Go! They spent one last night in the open. They were over the worst of the peaks, in a sheltered valley of pine. Luke built a fire, small and hot, hidden by a circle of rocks. The old woman's food and medicine had given them a new,
fragile strength. The horse was grazing nearby on the first tough shoots of spring grass. They sat close, sharing the blanket. The air was still, the sky clear and brilliant with stars. The world felt peaceful, as if the hunt was 1,000 miles away. Clara had her hand on her stomach. The child was a small, secret warmth inside her. "Luke," she said, her voice quiet, "when we get to this town, if we get there." He waited. "They will see me," she whispered, staring into the flames. "They will know I ran from my wedding. They will see this." Her hand tightened. "They will have a name for me. A fallen woman, a harlot, and the child. They will call it a—" She could not say the word. She looked at him, her eyes full of a fear deeper than the river, deeper than the men who hunted them. Will you still be able to look at me? Will you still want me, when the whole world is calling me unclean?" Luke was silent for a long time. He looked at her, at the firelight on her face, at the grit under her fingernails, at the strength that had held on in the ice-cold water. She was the bravest person he had ever known. He reached out, not to her face, but to her hand, the one on her stomach. He covered it with his own, his calloused, scarred palm fitting over her knuckles. "What they call you, that is just air," he said, his voice low and steady. "It is just noise from a world that tried to break you, a world that does not matter." He pressed his hand gently. "This is real. You are real. Let them talk. Let them use their ugly words. They cannot take what is already mine to protect." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and the last of her fear dissolved. He was not a man of fancy words. He was a man of vows, and he had just made his final one. Dawn came, cold and gray. They were packing the horse, moving through a narrow ravine. The walls close on either side. The air was still, too still. The shot was a deafening crack that echoed off the rock. It was not aimed at them. It hit the horse. The animal screamed, a terrible, high-pitched sound, and its legs buckled. It collapsed, pinning Clara's leg for a moment before she could scramble free. "Down!" Luke roared. He grabbed her, shoving her behind a cluster of boulders. A second shot chipped stone near his head. "There he is!" a voice yelled from the ridge above. The rough voice. "The killer!" Luke drew his pistol. He had 5 shots left. He peered over the rock. He saw 3 of them, the 2 riders, and a third man standing behind them, dressed in fine, dark clothes. Miles Holloway. "Get the girl!" Miles shrieked, his voice high and thin. "I want her alive! Kill him!" One of the riders broke cover, running along the ridge, trying to get a better angle. Luke fired. He did not aim to kill. He aimed for the man's leg. The man cried out, clutching his thigh, and fell. "He shot me! The bastard shot me!" The second rider opened fire, the bullet slamming into the boulders, sending stone fragments stinging Clara's face. "Stay down," Luke commanded. He knew he had to move. He was pinned. He saw the second rider reloading, fumbling with cartridges. Luke stood, took aim, and fired. The man grunted, dropping his rifle, and slumped over, dead. Luke ducked back as a bullet sang past his ear, from Miles. He saw his chance. He had to get Clara out. "Run!" he hissed. "Back the way we came. Now!" "I will not leave you." "Go!" He stood to give her cover, firing his third shot toward Miles, forcing him down. As he did, the first rider, the one he had wounded in the leg, raised his own pistol from the ground. He fired. The bullet hit Luke in the side. The force was a hammer blow, spinning him around. A hot, searing fire exploded in his ribs. He grunted, his breath stolen, and fell to his knees. His pistol clattered on the rocks. "Luke!" Clara screamed. She ran to him, not away. "No!" he gasped, trying to push her. "Run!" But it was too late. Miles Holloway struggled down the rocky slope,
his pale face flushed with triumph, his small pistol in his hand. "Well, well," Miles sneered, his breath pluming. "The romantic escape. It ends here, in the mud." He grabbed Clara by the arm, yanking her away from Luke. She screamed, clawing at him. "You are coming with me," he hissed, his fingers biting into her flesh. "You are my property. Clara, ruined or not, you will be my wife. You will bear my child, and you will learn to obey." He struck her, a hard, open-handed blow across the face. She fell. "As for him," Miles said, nudging Luke's shoulder with his boot. Luke was on his hands and knees, blood pouring from his side, his vision graying. "He will hang. I sent a wire to Helena 2 days ago about a wanted murderer from Wyoming named Luke Mallory. They are very interested to meet him. I will see you swing. Killer." He dragged Clara to her feet. He tied her hands with a rope from his saddle. He had his own horse, and one for the wounded rider. He threw Clara onto the spare mount, tied her legs, and got on his own. "Leave him," Miles commanded his man. "Let the wolves have him." Clara screamed Luke's name, fighting a wild, desperate sound. "Luke, Luke!" He watched them ride away, her voice echoing in the ravine until it was gone. Luke collapsed. The cold mud was a shock against his face. He lay in a pool of his own blood. This was it. This was how it ended. Alone, just like Samuel. He had failed, again. He closed his eyes. The gray world began to go black. Mine to protect. The whisper, his own voice, his vow. He opened his eyes. The pain was a white-hot ocean, but beneath it was the rage. The same rage that had made him pull the trigger on Johnson. He would not die here. He would not let his brother's story be his. He would not let that monster win. He forced his hand to move. It was slick with blood. He felt his shirt, tearing a long strip. He wrapped it, tight, around his ribs. It was a clumsy, useless gesture, but it was something. He found his pistol. He fumbled it open. 2 shots left. He crawled to his knees. The world spun. He pushed himself to his feet, using the boulder for support. He was dizzy, sick. He looked at the trail in the mud. They were heading east, back to the towns, back to the law that would hang him and give her to Miles. He took 1 step, then another. He was bleeding. He was half dead, but he was relentless. He followed the trail. He was a ghost, and he was hunting. He walked for hours. He fell. He got up. He fell again. He crawled. The world was a blur of gray trees and red pain. He did not feel the cold. He only felt the fire in his side and the ice in his heart. As the sun set, he saw it. The trail led to a ruin, a small stone chapel, its roof burned away, its timbers black against the purple sky. He heard a voice, "Miles," taunting. He crept forward, his body screaming, every step a fresh agony. He was leaving a trail of blood, but it did not matter. He reached the wall, pulling himself up to a broken window slit. He saw them. Clara was tied to the old stone altar rail. Miles was pacing in front of her, drinking from a flask. The wounded rider was gone. He was alone with her. "Dead, my dear," Miles was saying, his voice slurring slightly from the whiskey. "Back in that ravine, food for the wolves, and when they find his body, they will know he was the murderer from Wyoming. I made sure of it. He will hang, even in death." He came close, tracing her jaw with 1 pale finger. Clara recoiled, spitting at him. He laughed. "You will be the widow of a killer, or the wife of a banker. A very rich, very powerful banker. Your choice, my love. It has always been your choice." "Get away from her." The voice was a raw croak. It came from the doorway. Miles spun. Luke stood there, framed in the ruined archway. He was a terrible sight, a specter from the grave, caked in blood and mud, his face the color of ash. He was holding his pistol, but it wavered. "You," Miles breathed, his face white with terror. "You are dead." "Not yet," Luke said. He lunged. He did not have the strength to shoot. He only had the strength to kill. Miles fumbled for his own pistol. He was not a fighter. He shrieked as Luke tackled him. They crashed to the stone floor. Luke's hands found his throat. He squeezed, all his remaining life, all his rage, focused in that grip. Miles kicked, his legs flailing. He got his pistol arm free. He pressed the barrel against Luke's chest and fired. The explosion was deafening in the small space. Luke grunted, the impact throwing him back. The new wound was a mortal one, a searing hole in his chest. He slumped, his grip loosening. Miles scrambled away, gasping for air, his eyes wide with madness and victory. He got to his feet. He raised his pistol, pointing it at Luke's head. "I told you," Miles wheezed. "He would hang." A second shot. It was not from Miles. It was from Luke. He had fallen, but he had kept his own pistol. He fired from the floor. A single, final act of will. Miles looked down. A small, dark hole had appeared on his fine white shirt. He looked at Clara, his expression one of pure surprise. He stumbled backward. He tripped on the broken altar steps. His head struck the stone corner of the altar with a sickening, final crack. He did not move. Silence. The echo faded, replaced by the sound of Clara screaming. "Luke!" She tore at the ropes, her wrists raw, and ran to him. He was on his side, the stones dark with his blood. She fell, gathering his head into her lap, cradling him. "No," she wept. "No, you cannot. You promised. You promised." She pressed her hands to the new wound, trying to hold the life inside him. He looked up at her. His eyes were cloudy, his breath a shallow, wet rattle. He tried to smile. The scar on his face, the one that had always made him look grim, now looked impossible. "Saved you," he whispered. "You saved me," she sobbed, her tears raining down on his face. "I have you. Do not go. Please do not go. Luke, I will not let you. I will not." She held him tight as the last light faded from the sky, his blood on her hands, her voice a raw plea in the cold, silent ruin. She refused to let him go. The first thing she was aware of was the smell. It was not the metallic, coppery odor of old blood, or the cold, damp stone of the ruined chapel. It was lye soap, clean linen, and the faint, sweet scent of chamomile. Clara's eyes opened. The ceiling was not the star-filled, broken roof of the ruin. It was smooth, whitewashed plaster, cracked with age. She was on a cot, a real cot, with a thin mattress stuffed with straw, not the cold, hard ground. She was covered by a quilt, its colors faded from 100 washings. She sat up, a sudden, dizzying rush of panic. The movement pulled at her, and she felt a dull ache in her head where Miles had struck her. "Luke," she whispered, the name a raw plea. The memory was a physical blow. The chapel, the blood, his body, so heavy and limp in her arms, his life pouring out onto the stone floor. She remembered screaming, refusing to let him go, even as his eyes had closed. A small, thin woman in a simple gray dress entered the room, carrying a tray. She had a kind, weary face, lined by sun and worry. "You are awake, child. Thank the Lord." "Where am I?" Clara's voice was a croak. "You are safe," the woman said, setting the tray down. It held a cup of tea and a small bowl of thin broth. "You are at the St. Mary's Mission. My name is Sister Agnes." Clara grabbed the woman's thin wrist. Her own hand was shaking. The man who was with me, Luke, did he?" Sister Agnes placed her free hand over Clara's. Her skin was warm. "He is alive." Clara's body went limp.
a sob of relief so profound it left her breathless. Alive? He is a fighter, the sister said, a small, grim smile touching her lips. And you, child, you saved him. When the marshal's patrol found you, you were still holding him, using your own cloak to keep the life in him. You had not slept. You just held on. She was weak, her legs trembling, but she stood. I have to see him. Sister Agnes did not argue. She saw the iron in the young woman's eyes. She put a supportive arm around Clara's waist and helped her walk from the small room. Across a quiet, sunlit courtyard paved with uneven stones, and into a larger room, the infirmary. It held 3 cots. 2 were empty. He was in the 3rd. He was so still. He was whiter than the sheets, his face sunken, his eyes closed. A thick bandage was wrapped around his chest, another around his side. He looked small, his strength gone, the scar on his face a pale, jagged line on a canvas of death. Luke, she whispered. She stumbled the last few steps, falling to her knees by the cot. She took his hand. It was lying, palm up, on the blanket. It was cold. He did not move. He sleeps, Sister Agnes said gently. The doctor, the one from the fort, he took the bullets. The fever was high for 2 days, but it broke this morning. He is weak, but he will heal. God has been merciful. Clara just knelt, clutching his hand, pressing it to her cheek. He was alive. The word was a miracle. She was still there, her head resting on the cot, when his fingers finally moved in her grip. His eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy, confused. They found the light, then the ceiling. Then they found her. Clara, he breathed. His voice was a dry, rasping sound, barely audible. You, safe. I am here, she wept, her tears falling onto his hand. I am here. Luke, I am safe. He tried to squeeze her hand. The effort was immense. A tiny flicker of his fingers, but it was enough. He closed his eyes, the deep lines of pain on his face softening just a little. He knew she was there. He could rest. Later that day, a man came to see them. He was not a doctor, not a missionary. He wore a dusty coat, a star pinned to his vest. He was tall, his face weathered, his eyes a clear, tired blue. He introduced himself as Marshal Elias Thorne. He spoke to Clara first, in the courtyard, while she drank the broth. He was gentle, but his questions were precise. She told him everything, from the moment she fled her wedding, to the storm, to the cabin. She told him about Miles's cruelty, about the lies, about the men who had come. We found them, Thorne said, his voice grave. The homesteads, burned to the ground. Old man Swanson, he is alive, barely. He told us what happened, how they beat him, how they boasted of having a warrant. They lied. Clara said they were just hired men. They were. Thorne confirmed. We found the one Mallory shot, the one in the leg. He was terrified. He confessed everything. How Miles Holloway paid them. How the warrant was a piece of paper Holloway's father had a friend sign. It had no legal standing. He looked at Clara, his gaze softening. The circuit judge was here last week. He heard the testimony. He heard from Jed Swanson. He heard from the Hansons, who saw the fires. He heard the confession from Holloway's man. Clara held her breath. And the death of Miles Holloway, the marshal said, his voice official, has been ruled justifiable, a death brought about by his own violent and illegal actions. Mr. Mallory acted in defense of himself and in defense of you, Mrs. Ellison. As far as this territory is concerned, he is a free man. Clara closed her eyes. The weight of the chase, the running, it just fell away. But there is one more thing, Thorne said, his voice hesitant. Mr. Holloway, it seems,
was thorough. He sent a wire to Helena, and from there to Wyoming, about an old warrant for a Luke Mallory for murder. Clara's blood ran cold.
No, he told me it was to save his brother. It was...
I know, Thorne said, raising a hand. I received a wire back from the marshal in Cheyenne. It seems that old warrant is complicated. The foreman, Johnson, was a brute. Widely known. After his family lost their influence, the bounty was quietly rescinded more than 5 years ago. They just never sent word out this far. He put his hat back on. Luke Mallory has been a free man for 5 years. He just did not know it. The news, which should have been a release, settled on Luke like a stone. He was free. The word was so foreign he could not grasp it. He had lived as a fugitive for so long. The habits of fear were carved into his bones. He was free, but he was still the man who had run. The mission was on the edge of a small, dusty settlement. As Luke and Clara healed, the world returned, and with it, the whispers. The law was the law, but people were people. The women of the town, the good wives, they brought broth to the mission. They brought mended clothes. They looked at Clara, at her hands, which were now rough and calloused. They looked at her stomach, where the child she carried was now a small, visible curve beneath the simple homespun dress the sisters had given her. Their eyes were hard. Clara was by the mission well, pulling up a bucket of water. When she heard them, their voices were low, meant to carry. That's her, the one who ran from her wedding. Left a rich banker's son at the altar. Can you imagine? Ran off with him, a second voice said, a sharp hiss. The killer, the one who shot those men. I heard he killed a man in Wyoming, too. And look at her. The first voice dropped. Shameless, swollen with it already, ruined. That is what she is, pure and simple, a fallen woman. Clara's hands tightened on the rope. She turned. She did not flinch. She just looked at them. Her gaze was not angry. It was just steady. She had faced Miles Holloway. She had faced the river. She had faced death. Their words were just air. They saw her looking. Their voices sputtered into silence. They picked up their baskets and hurried away, their backs rigid with judgment. Luke saw it, too. He was sitting in the courtyard, his first day allowed out of the infirmary. He was thin, the wound in his chest still a deep, angry ache. The men from the town, they would nod to him, a kind of grudging, fearful respect for a man who could shoot his way out of an ambush. But they did not speak to him. Their wives pulled their children close when he passed. He was not Luke. He was the Wyoming killer. He was the man who shot Holloway. The labels, free man or not, were branded on him. Clara came and sat beside him on the stone bench. She brought him a cup of water. The afternoon sun was warm. You heard them. He said it was not a question. I heard them, she replied, her voice quiet. He was silent for a long time, staring at his own hands, the hands that had killed, the hands that had held her. You should leave me, Clara. She looked at him. Do not be a fool. Luke, where would I go? The marshal, he said, his voice flat, insistent. He told me, your father, he is in Helena. When he heard about Miles, about what you went through, it broke him. He has stopped drinking. He is grieving. He wants you back. He wants to make it right. Clara looked at the high blue sky. She thought of her father, of his weakness, of the house that had been a cage. I am not going back, she said. This is not a life for you, he said, and the words burst out of him, raw with a new kind of pain. This, a half-life, tied to me, you heard them. You will be an outcast, and your child. He could not look at her. That child, they will call it names, and it's its protector, the man who stands as its father, will be me, a man they all whisper about, a killer. He turned to her, and his eyes were filled with that old, familiar torment, the guilt he could not shed. You survived the storm. You survived him. Do not let me be the thing that finally ruins you. You deserve a good life, a clean one, a husband who can give you a name. Not one he has to hide. You deserve to be respected. Clara was silent for a long moment. She watched a hawk circling, high on the thermals, a picture of freedom. She reached out and took his hand, his scarred, trembling hand. "Luke," she said, her voice so steady it surprised them both. "You call this a half-life? The life I had before, that was not even a half. It was a performance. It was a cold, empty room. It was a lie." She put her other hand on his scarred cheek, making him look at her. "You are the first person who has ever seen me. Not the banker's daughter, not the payment for a debt, just me. You are the first person who ever protected me. You are not my ruin. Luke Mallory, you are my home." "Clara," he whispered, his voice thick, "I am a broken man. I have killed." "You have survived," she interrupted, her voice fierce, the iron she had found in herself on full display. "So have I. My place is with the man who taught me to be strong. My place is with the man who held my hand in the rain when I was a coward. I am not leaving you. I will not be sent away. Not ever." He looked at her, at the woman she had become, at the unbending strength in her eyes, and he saw the truth. It was not his choice to make. It had never been. It was hers, and she had made it. He squeezed her hand, his own steadying. They rode west. Marshal Thorne, in a quiet, unofficial act of kindness, had given them 2 good horses. They were from the territorial stables, he had said, seized as assets from the Holloway estate. He had given them a sidearm, a new rifle, and a box of cartridges. "The Bitterroots are still wild," he'd said, and he'd wished them Godspeed. Sister Agnes had pressed a small leather pouch of coins into Clara's hand. "Donations for travelers," she'd called it, "to start anew." They did not look back. They were heading for Idaho, for the high, untouched valleys, for land that no one had yet claimed or spoiled. This journey was not a flight. It was an exodus. The trail was no longer an enemy. The spring was real now, the ground soft, the air warm and smelling of pine and damp earth. The world was coming alive, and so were they. They spoke little, but the silence was easy. It was the comfortable quiet of 2 people who had said everything that mattered, who had seen the worst of each other and had not turned away. He rode beside her, his body still healing, but his back was straight. He was no longer looking over his shoulder. He was looking forward. One evening, they made camp by a rushing, clear creek. The air was cool as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks. Clara sat by the fire, mending Luke's old shirt, the one he had given her in the cabin, the one she had kept. Her hands, once soft, were now deft with the needle. She began to hum. It was an old tune, one she did not even realize she knew. The words came, soft and unbidden. It was a lullaby, one her mother had sung to her, about a river and a willow tree. She sang, her voice a clear, sweet sound in the twilight, her free hand resting on the curve of her belly. Luke sat just behind her, his back against a log, watching the fire. He was cleaning the new rifle, his movement slow but methodical. He stopped. He just listened. He moved, shifting to sit beside her. He put his arm around her, and his own large, calloused hand came to rest over hers, the one on her stomach. He said nothing. He just sat there, his hand covering hers, his head leaning against hers, and listened to her sing to their child. Under their joined hands, he felt it, for the first time, a faint, impossible flutter, a tiny kick, a flicker of life. His breath hitched.
He closed his eyes, his hand tightening over hers. He was steady. He was home. They found it after 3 more weeks of riding. They had crossed a high, difficult pass, the horses struggling in the last of the high country snow. They crested the ridge, and the world opened up below them. It was a valley, a perfect green bowl, cupped by granite peaks. A dozen snow-fed streams, looking like silver ribbons, wound their way down to meet in a winding, clear river. The valley floor was a sea of tall grass and wildflowers, purple and yellow and white. It was untouched. There were no fences. There was no smoke, save for their own small campfire. There was only the sound of the wind in the high pines. Clara stopped her horse, her hands on the saddle horn. "Luke!" she breathed. "Yes," he said, pulling up beside her. "Here." They built their life. They built a cabin. It was hard, brutal work. His side was still tender, and his strength was slow to return. But she worked beside him. He taught her how to swing an axe, how to notch the pine logs, how to mix the mud and straw for the chinking. She was strong. She was tireless. Her laughter, which he had heard for the first time in the snow, was now a common sound, echoing off the mountains. Their cabin was small, just 1 room, but the walls were straight. The roof was sound, and the stone fireplace he built drew clean and hot. They built a small barn for the horses, and a fence for the garden she insisted on planting. The seasons turned. The summer was bright and full of work. The fall came, turning the aspens on the mountainsides to rivers of gold. The nights grew cold. One night, the wind returned. Clara was heavy with the child. Her time near, she was sitting by the fire, her feet propped up, knitting a small, soft blanket. Luke was standing by the door, looking out at the first hard flakes of snow driving sideways in the darkness. The wind moaned through the pines, a high, lonely sound. It was the sound that had once been her terror. Now, it was just the sound of home. The new wooden shutter on the window, the one he had just finished, was rattling. "Luke," she said, not looking up from her knitting. "The wind is rising. It sounds like a bad one." She looked up, her face soft in the firelight. "Would you tie the shutter ropes tighter, before the storm hits?" He turned. He had the strip of rawhide in his hand. He walked to the window, and he hesitated. His hand, holding the rope, stopped. He looked at her. She was looking at him, a small, knowing look in her eyes. "Tie me tighter." The words, his old memory, her desperate, whispered confession. The memory of that night in his old cabin, her trembling, his restraint, the fear, the need, the moment that had broken them, and the moment that had bound them. A slow, quiet smile spread across Luke's face. It was a smile that finally reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. The scar on his cheek no longer looked grim. It was just a part of him. She smiled back, a full, deep smile of shared knowledge, of a past survived. He turned and tied the rope, his hands perfectly, beautifully steady. He crossed the small room. He did not sit on the floor, across from her. He sat on the bench beside her. He leaned over, kissed her forehead, and then pulled her back against his chest, wrapping his arms around her. His hands, scarred and sure, came to rest on her belly, on the new life they had protected together. They sat in the warmth of their fire, the storm screaming outside their strong, new walls. They were scarred. They were outcasts. They were 2 broken pieces that had, somehow, made each other whole. They were unbroken. They had found something purer than forgiveness, something stronger than judgment. They had found love, and it had survived the worst of the West. Thank you so much for listening to our story. Please let us know what you thought in the comments, and tell us where you are listening from so we can all connect. Do not forget to subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel and share your thoughts in English.